ballroom at Devonshire House fell silent. Not a gradual hush, but a sudden, suffocating vacuum of sound, as if the music itself had gasped. Every eye locked onto one man, a shadow-given form, who had just entered. This was Alexander Blackwood, the Duke of Ashford, a man whose name was a weapon, whose fortune was a fortress, and whose reputation was a shroud. He never attended such frivolous events, and yet here he was, and he was staring directly at Seraphina Sutton, the ruined debutante in the corner. What followed wasn't a whisper. It was a thunderclap that would shatter the rigid world of the London season forever. The scent of beeswax, expensive perfume, and desperation hung heavy in the air of the grand ballroom. For most, it was the pinnacle of the London season. For Miss Seraphina Sutton, it was a gilded cage filled with predators. She stood near a marble alcove, partially hidden by a towering fern, her gloved fingers twisting the worn ribbon on her fan. Her dress, a pale yellow silk, had been her mother's. It was 3 seasons out of fashion, and the subtle mending near the hem felt like a beacon of her family's poverty. "Do try to look less like a cornered mouse, Seraphina," her aunt, Lady Beatrice, hissed beside her. Beatrice's own gown, a garish purple, was offensively new. She had taken Seraphina in after the scandal, a supposed act of charity that felt more like indentured servitude. "We are lucky to even be here. Lord and Lady Ramsay only invited us because they pity me. Straighten your spine. You are still a Sutton, even if your father saw fit to gamble away the name." Seraphina's throat tightened. It hadn't been gambling. It had been misplaced trust, a disastrous investment in American railways urged on by a man who called himself a friend. When the venture collapsed, her father, unable to face the disgrace, had taken a pistol to his study. The creditors had descended like vultures, leaving Seraphina and her mother with nothing but their name, and even that was now tarnished beyond recognition. Her mother had faded soon after, leaving Seraphina alone, a penniless ward of her spiteful aunt. "Yes, aunt," Seraphina murmured, her gaze fixed on the polished floor. She felt the stares, the whispers. That's her, the daughter of Arthur Sutton, the one who lost everything. She was a ghost at the feast, a cautionary tale for the ambitious mammas and their glittering daughters. A shadow fell over her. "Lady Beatrice? Miss Sutton?" Seraphina's blood ran cold. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Lord Julian Carmichael. He was a handsome man, with blonde hair and a perfect smile that never reached his cold blue eyes. He was also the man who had advised her father, the man who had walked away from the financial wreckage without a single stain on his own character, somehow emerging richer than before. "Lord Carmichael," Aunt Beatrice tittered, her fan fluttering like a trapped bird. "How delightful to see you." "The delight is all mine." His eyes raked over Seraphina, a possessive, appraising look that made her skin crawl. "Miss Sutton, you are looking resilient. That colour suits your complexion." It was an insult veiled as a compliment. He knew this was an old gown. He knew she had nothing. "You are kind, my lord," Seraphina said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I have been meaning to call on you, Lady Beatrice," Carmichael continued, moving closer to Seraphina. She could smell his cologne, an expensive bay rum. "We have matters to discuss, matters of a delicate financial nature." Aunt Beatrice's smile faltered. She too was in Carmichael's debt. He had offered her a generous loan to maintain her lifestyle, using Seraphina as unspoken collateral. "Indeed," Beatrice said, her voice suddenly strained. "Perhaps you would care to escort Seraphina for a lemonade. I see Lady Jersey waving me over. She gave Serafina a sharp, warning look before scuttling away, abandoning her niece to the wolf. "Your aunt is a practical woman," Carmichael said, offering his arm. Serafina had no choice but to take it. His grip on her elbow was just a fraction too tight. "She understands the realities of the world. Something your father, bless him, never did." "My father was a man of honor, Lord Carmichael," Serafina said, her voice low and fierce. "Honor? Honor is a luxury for those who can afford it, my dear. It doesn't pay for gowns or put a roof over your head." He guided her toward the terrace, away from the watchful eyes of the main crowd. The cool night air was a relief, but the implications of his words were suffocating. "What is it you want, my lord?" she asked, pulling her arm from his grasp as soon as they were shielded by the stone balustrade. He smiled, that cold, reptilian smile. "I want you, Serafina. I have since the first day I saw you, when your father still had his fortune. I find your predicament has only made the prospect more appealing." Bile rose in her throat. "That is impossible." "Is it?" He took a step closer. "Your aunt is on the brink of ruin. When she falls, where will you go? To a workhouse? Perhaps a companion to some withered old crone? I am offering you a lifeline. Be my wife. I will settle your aunt's debts. I will dress you in the finest silks. You will have everything. Everything but my self-respect," she whispered, backing away until her skirts brushed the cold stone. "You are in no position to bargain with terms like self-respect. I am offering you salvation. Your father's good name is gone. Yours is hanging by a thread. Marry me, and I will restore it." "And if I refuse?" His smile vanished. "Then I will call in your aunt's notes. Tomorrow. She will be in Fleet Prison by the end of the week. And you?" He reached out, touching a stray curl by her ear. "Will be on the street. Do you truly think any other man in this room would have you? A penniless, ruined woman? I am your only option." He was right. That was the most terrifying part. She was trapped. She looked back into the glittering ballroom, a room full of people who had once been her friends, who now saw her as either a pariah or a tragedy. Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for any escape, any hope at all. And then she saw him. It was as if the room itself had tilted. The music, the chatter, the laughter. It all faded. He stood in the grand archway, framed by gilded plasterwork, a figure of absolute stillness in a sea of motion. He wasn't tall, but he commanded the space. He was dressed in immaculate black, a stark contrast to the colorful silks of the other men. His face was hard, angular, with a jaw that looked carved from granite, and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb the candlelight. A thin, white scar ran from his left temple to the edge of his jaw, a relic of a duel, it was rumored, that had left the other man dead. Alexander Blackwood, the Duke of Ashford. He was the most feared man in London. Not just feared, reviled. Whispers followed him everywhere. They said he had driven his own father to an early grave. They said he had destroyed business rivals with a single, ruthless word. They said he was cold, cruel, and utterly without a soul. He owned half of Mayfair, a dozen coal mines, and, it was said, the loyalties of half the cabinet. And he never, ever came to balls. "What is he doing here?" Carmichael breathed, his voice for the first time laced with genuine shock, perhaps even a hint of fear. The Duke's gaze swept the room, dismissive and cold. It passed over the cowering debutantes, the posturing lords, and the gossiping matriarchs. And then his eyes found Serafina. They didn't just look at her. They pinned her. It was not a look of desire, like Carmichael's. It was a look of assessment, of calculation. It was the look of a hawk spotting its quarry from a mile away. Serafina's breath caught. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The entire ballroom seemed to be holding its breath with her. The Duke of Ashford took one step into the room, and then another. He was not walking toward the receiving line. He was not walking toward the refreshments. He was walking directly, inexorably, toward her. The path to the terrace parted like the Red Sea. Men of Parliament, who would shout down their rivals in the Commons, suddenly found pressing needs to inspect the upholstery. Ladies who prided themselves on their ironclad social standing averted their gaze, their fans fluttering with nervous energy, not coquetry. The air crackled with attention, so thick it was almost audible. Alexander Blackwood did not acknowledge the silence he created. His focus was singular. He moved with a predator's economy of motion, his footsteps silent on the marble floor. Each step brought him closer to the terrace, closer to the tableau of the cowering beauty and the preening villain. On the terrace, Lord Carmichael had recovered his composure. He mistook the Duke's approach as mere coincidence. "His Grace seems to be enjoying the air," Carmichael sneered quietly to Serafina. A man of his reputation must find all this frivolity tiresome. He turned, intending to offer a cursory, respectful bow and guide Serafina back inside. But the Duke did not stop. He emerged onto the terrace, the moonlight catching the silver at his temples and the stark white of his scar. He seemed to draw all the shadows with him. He stopped 3 feet from them. His dark eyes flickered once to Carmichael, a look of such profound dismissal that it was more insulting than any slur. Then his gaze settled fully on Serafina. "Miss Sutton," he said. His voice was not loud, but it resonated, a deep baritone that seemed to vibrate in her very bones. Serafina forgot to curtsy. She simply stared, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Your Grace," she managed, the words barely a whisper. "Lord Carmichael," the Duke said, his tone dropping a degree. "You are blocking the lady's view." Carmichael bristled. "Your Grace, Miss Sutton and I were just engaged in a private conversation. It appeared," the Duke said, "to be concluded." It was not a request. It was a command. Carmichael, for all his arrogance, was not a fool. He was wealthy, but Ashford was powerful. To defy him here, so publicly, was social and financial suicide. "Of course," Carmichael said, his face tightening, the false smile plastered back on. "Miss Sutton, Your Grace." He executed a sharp bow, and with one last, furious look at Serafina, he was gone. He melted back into the ballroom, defeated. Serafina was left alone with the Duke of Ashford. The silence was more terrifying than Carmichael's threats. She could feel the eyes of the entire party on her back, even from inside. She was now the center of the lion's attention. She finally found her manners and dropped into a low curtsy. "Thank you, Your Grace. You did not have to intervene." "I am aware," he said. His gaze was unnervingly direct. He was studying her, not as a man studies a woman, but as a general studies a map. "You are Arthur Sutton's daughter." It was a statement, not a question. "I am." "Your father was a fool. He trusted the wrong men." The bluntness of it stung, but she couldn't deny its truth. "He was a good man, Your Grace. He was just too trusting." "Trust is a currency one cannot afford to spend lightly," Ashford replied. He turned his gaze from her to the London skyline, the gas lamps small stars in the smoggy dark. "Carmichael, he is the man who ruined your father, is he not?" Serafina gasped. How did you know?" "It is my business to know things. I know he advised your father to buy into the Ohio and Mississippi line. I know he sold his own shares 2 days before the collapse was announced. And I know he holds the notes on your aunt's home." "He knew everything." This man, this shadow, knew the intimate, painful details of her ruin. "And now he wishes to collect," the Duke stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "He offers to marry you. In exchange, he will forgive your aunt's debt and save you from penury. You, in turn, will be his property, a trophy won from your father's corpse." Serafina recoiled, horrified and amazed at his cold, brutal accuracy. "You have no right to speak of such things." "I have every right. I am about to make a counteroffer." He turned back to her. The intensity of his stare was almost physical. "You are in a trap, Miss Sutton. He has closed every door. He is correct in one assumption. No other man in that room will have you. Your name is poison. You are compromised by association. You have no dowry, no prospects, and a wolf at your heels." Every word was a hammer blow, striking down any small, lingering hope she might have had. "Then why?" she whispered, tears of helpless rage stinging her eyes. "Are you telling me this? To revel in my humiliation?" "No," the Duke said. "I am telling you this to establish the facts. You are desperate. I am in need. It seems we are suited to a bargain." "A bargain," she repeated, bewildered. What could this man, who owned half of London, possibly need from her? "I require a duchess, an heir. My line must continue. I find the process of courtship tedious, the simpering debutantes repulsive, and the entire marriage market a disgrace to human intelligence. I will not play the game." He stepped closer. She held her ground, refusing to be intimidated, though her every instinct screamed at her to flee. "You, Miss Sutton, are intelligent. You are beautiful, in a way that is not cloying. You have steel in your spine. I saw it just now with Carmichael. You are also in an impossible position. This makes you, from my perspective, the ideal candidate." Serafina's mind spun. What are you proposing?" "I am proposing a solution." He gestured back toward the ballroom. "Lord Carmichael believes he has you cornered. He is using your family's honor as his weapon. He thinks he can force your hand in private. I, however, prefer to conduct my business in the open. It is far more efficient." Before she could process his words, he offered her his arm. "Come, Miss Sutton." "Where?" "Back into the ballroom." His voice was iron. "You are about to receive a much better offer." He didn't wait for her acceptance. He simply took her hand and placed it on his arm. His touch was firm, possessive. Numbly, she allowed him to lead her. They stepped back through the doors. The music, which had tentatively resumed, stuttered and died again. Every single guest, the lords, the ladies, the chaperones, the musicians, all turned. And then Alexander Blackwood, the Duke of Ashford, led the ruined Serafina Sutton into the exact center of the ballroom floor. He did not release her arm. He stood beside her, a dark pillar of power, and let the silence stretch, tightening the tension in the room until Serafina thought she might faint. She saw Lord Carmichael watching from near the card room, his face pale with confusion and dawning fury. She saw her aunt, her mouth open in a perfect O of shock. "Your Grace," she whispered, tugging at his sleeve. "What are you doing? Everyone is staring." "Let them stare," the Duke said, his voice carrying easily in the dead silence. He turned, not to Seraphine, but to the room at large. He was addressing the ton. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice cutting through the quiet. "My apologies for the interruption." He then turned his full, undivided attention to Serafina. He took her other hand, holding both of hers in his grip. He was not kneeling. He was not smiling. It was not a proposal. It was a proclamation. "Miss Serafina Sutton," he said, his voice clear and resonant, And then he made his offer. An offer that left her and everyone else breathless. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was not just a lack of sound, it was a heavy, pressurized void, where the only movement was the flicker of 100 candles and the frantic pulse beating in Serafina's throat. She stood trapped, her hands held firmly by the most powerful man in England, her mind utterly blank with shock. The Duke of Ashford looked only at her. The rest of the room, the astonished faces of the peerage, the scandalized gasps of the matriarchs, the pale, furious visage of Lord Carmichael, did not exist. "Miss Sutton," he began again, his voice precise and devoid of any romantic inflection. "You are a woman of intelligence. I will not insult you with poetry or false sentiment. We are both practical people, caught in circumstances that require a practical solution." He took a slight breath, the first sign of anything other than pure, cold control. "Lord Carmichael has made you an offer of marriage, conditional on his generosity in forgiving your family's debts he himself engineered." A collective, horrified gasp swept the room. It was one thing to know it. It was another to have it spoken aloud at Devonshire House by a duke. Lord Carmichael went from pale to ashen, his hand gripping his waistcoat. "He offers you disgrace, whispered and veiled, in exchange for your submission," Ashford continued, his voice relentless. "I offer you something different." He released one of her hands, only to lightly, almost clinically, tilt her chin up so she was forced to meet his dark, intense gaze. "I am Alexander Blackwood, Duke of Ashford. I have a title that is unassailable, a fortune that is boundless, and a reputation that ensures I am never, ever trifled with. I require a duchess to manage my household and provide me with a legitimate heir. You, Miss Sutton, require salvation. You require protection. You require the immediate and permanent removal of men like Lord Carmichael from your life." Serafina's legs felt weak. She couldn't breathe. This wasn't happening. It was a fever dream. "Therefore," the Duke announced, his voice rising just enough to command every corner of the vast room, "I offer you this, before this assembly. I offer you my name, my protection, and my title. I will settle a sum of £100,000 on you, in your name, untouchable by any but you, upon our marriage. Your aunt's debts will be paid in full by noon tomorrow. Lord Carmichael will never speak to you, look at you, or trouble you again, or he will answer directly to me." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. £100,000. It was a king's ransom. It was freedom, power, and security beyond her wildest dreams. "In return," he said, his voice dropping slightly, for her ears only, though the room strained to hear, "I ask for your loyalty. I ask for your discretion, and I ask for an heir. It will be a marriage of convenience, Miss Sutton, a contract. There will be no pretense of love between us. You will be the Duchess of Ashford, with all the power and privilege that name entails. You will be free, and you will be safe." He held her gaze. "Before this assembly, I ask for your answer. Will you marry me?" Serafina's mind raced. She saw her father's face, pale in his coffin. She saw her aunt's cruel, pinched expression. She saw Lord Carmichael's leering smile, the image of a life spent as his property, his chattel, subject to his whims and his cold, hateful touch. And then she looked at the Duke. He was not offering her love. He was not offering her tenderness. He was offering her a shield. He was offering her a sword. He was offering her escape. He was a cold, ruthless, feared man. But he was also, in this moment, brutally honest. He was the devil she did not know, but he was offering a bargain that was infinitely better than the one from the devil she did. She saw Lord Carmichael start to move, to push through the crowd, his face a mask of apoplectic rage. "This is an outrage. She is compromised. This is madness." The Duke didn't even look at him. His eyes remained locked on Serafina. "Your answer, Miss Sutton." "Now." She pulled her hand from his grasp, not in rejection, but to straighten her spine. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze not as a victim, but as a partner in this bargain. The room, the whispers, the scandal, it all faded away, leaving only the two of them in the center of the storm. "Your Grace," she said, her voice clear and steady, ringing out in the stunned silence. "You have offered me a contract, not a romance." A flicker of something, respect, approval, passed through his dark eyes. "I have." "Then, as a partner to this contract," Serafina said, "I accept your terms." The ballroom erupted. Aunt Beatrice fainted dead away, collapsing in a heap of purple silk. Lady Jersey, the ton's greatest gossip, actually dropped her fan. Lord Carmichael let out a choked, strangled sound, and seeing the Duke's head turn slowly toward him, he spun on his heel and fled the room. The Duke of Ashford gave a single, curt nod. It was done. "Good," he said. He took her arm once more, his grip proprietary, final. He turned to the stunned, babbling crowd. "My fiancé and I will be departing. We will be married by special license. On Friday." He did not wait for congratulations. He did not bother with the hosts. He simply drew Serafina's arm through his, and, with the same deliberate, unstoppable force with which he had entered, he guided her through the sea of scandalized aristocrats, out of the ballroom, and into the cool London night, leaving absolute social pandemonium in his wake. She was no longer Serafina Sutton, the ruined debutante. She was the future Duchess of Ashford, and her life, she realized with a terrifying, breathless lurch, would never be the same. The carriage ride to Ashford House was conducted in almost complete silence. The only sounds were the rhythmic clopping of 4 perfectly matched bays on the cobblestones, the jingle of the harness, and the distant shouts of a link boy. Serafina sat on the plush velvet squab, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She stared out the window, watching the gas lamps of Mayfair slide by, each one illuminating a world she no longer belonged to. She was betrothed to the Duke of Ashford. The thought was so preposterous, so utterly surreal, that her mind kept shying away from it. The Duke sat opposite her, a figure of shadows in the carriage's dim interior. He was not looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the street ahead, his expression unreadable, his hands resting on a silver-topped cane. He had not spoken a word since placing her in the carriage, his command to the footman, "Home," being the last. Serafina's mind was a whirlwind of questions. Why her? Why so public? What kind of man was this, who could shatter the rules of society with a few sentences and not even blink? "You are wondering why I chose you," he said, his voice startling her. He was not looking at her, but he had read her thoughts as easily as a broadsheet. "Yes, Your Grace," she admitted. "I told you. You are intelligent, and you are desperate. That makes you reliable. A debutante flush with victory would be insufferable. She would believe I married her for love. You will not make that mistake. You know exactly what this is." "A contract," Serafina said, her voice flat. "Precisely." He finally turned his head, and his eyes found hers in the dark. "And you, Miss Sutton, are the daughter of Arthur Sutton. He was a sentimental fool, but he was an honest one. I am betting his daughter inherited his honesty, if not his sentiment. You knew my father. I knew of him. I knew he was being fleeced by Carmichael. I considered warning him. But it was not my affair. My intervention would have been seen as irregular. "But what you did tonight was not," she countered, a spark of her old fire returning. A humorless smile touched his lips. "That was different. Carmichael was poaching on my territory." Serafina frowned. "Your territory? I do not understand." "He was upsetting the natural order. He was a vulture. I detest vultures. And besides," he added, turning his gaze back to the window, "he made the mistake of believing I would not notice." The carriage slowed, turning through a massive, wrought-iron gate. Serafina looked out and gasped. Ashford House was not a house. It was a palace, a fortress of pale stone that consumed an entire London square. It loomed against the night sky, dark and imposing, with only a few lights burning in the lower windows. It looked as cold and unyielding as its master. The carriage stopped. A footman, his face pale and impassive, snapped open the door. The Duke descended first, then turned and offered Serafina his hand. His touch was cold, even through her glove. He led her up the massive stone steps and through oak doors so large they looked like they belonged to a cathedral. The entrance hall was a cavern of marble, cold and echoing. A stern, grey-haired man in butler's livery stood waiting. He bowed low. "Your Grace, you are home earlier than expected." His eyes flickered to Serafina, betraying not a hint of surprise. "Hargrove, this is Miss Serafina Sutton. She is my fiancée. We will be married on Friday. She will be your new Duchess. Have Mrs. Davies prepare the Duchess's suite. Immediately." Hargrove bowed again, his expression unchanged. "Very good, Your Grace. Will Miss Sutton be staying the night?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implication. Serafina's face burned. "No," the Duke said, his voice sharp. "She will not. My brougham will return her to her aunt's residence. See to it." "Of course, Your Grace." Hargrove melted back into the shadows. "My library," the Duke said, gesturing to a set of dark wood doors. It was not an invitation. Serafina followed him. The library was as vast as the hall, lined from floor to ceiling with thousands of books. A fire roared in a fireplace large enough to stand in, but it did little to warm the room. The Duke moved to a massive desk, pulling a sheet of parchment from a drawer. "Our agreement," he said, "needs to be formalized." He lit a desk lamp, illuminating the sharp planes of his face and the stark white of the scar. "I will not have this undone by whim or regret. You are free to walk out that door. My carriage will take you home. My lawyers will deal with Carmichael and your aunt's debts regardless. Consider it a fee for the evening's entertainment." She stared at him. "You would? You would still save me, even if I refuse?" "I said I would remove Carmichael from your life." "I will," he said dismissively. "But you will be ruined. The Ton will call you the woman who publicly accepted and then jilted the Duke of Ashford. You will be a pariah. Carmichael will be destroyed, yes, but you will still be penniless and disgraced. Your only option will be gone. If you walk out that door, you are ruined, but free. If you stay, you are saved, but bound to me." He was offering her a choice, but it was no choice at all. He had laid the trap as perfectly as Carmichael had, but his was lined with silk and gold. "I will not walk out," Serafina said, her voice shaking but firm. "I thought not." He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Sit." She sat. He dipped a pen in an inkwell and held it out to her. "I have already had my solicitor draft the settlement papers. The sum is, as stated, £100,000, placed in a trust under your sole control. It is yours, Whether I live or die, whether you provide an heir or not, it is your payment for services rendered." "Services?" "The service of being my Duchess," he said, his voice cold. "Of bearing my name, of sitting at my table, of warming my bed and giving me a son." The clinical, brutal honesty of it made her flinch. "I see. My terms are simple. You will be loyal. You will never discuss my private affairs with anyone. You will never bring scandal to my name. You will run my households with efficiency, and you will provide me with an heir. In all other matters, you are your own. You may have your own friends, your own pursuits, your own life. I will not interfere, and you will not interfere in mine." "Your life," she ventured, thinking of the whispers. "I have business. I have associates. They are not your concern. My door will be locked to you, as yours will be to me, except when an heir is the object. Do I make myself clear?" "Perfectly clear, Your Grace." It was a prison, then, a beautiful, gilded, wealthy prison. "Sign the paper, Miss Sutton." She took the pen. Her hand was steady. She looked at the man before her. He was offering her a life devoid of love, of warmth, of affection, but he was also offering her safety, power, and revenge. She thought of Lord Carmichael's face as he fled the ballroom. It was worth it. She signed her name, Seraphina Sutton, for the last time. "Good." He took the paper, sprinkled sand on the ink, and blew it off. He folded it and placed it in a drawer. "It is done. Hargrove will have the brougham ready. You will return to your aunt's house. Do not be alarmed by what you find. I have already sent men to assist her." "Assist her?" "She will be moved to a comfortable townhouse in Bath. Tonight, with an allowance that will keep her quiet and far away from London. She is no longer your concern." He had thought of everything. In the span of an hour, he had rewritten her entire existence. "Go home, Miss Sutton. My solicitor will call on you in the morning to begin the arrangements for the wedding." He turned away from her, already dismissing her, his attention shifting to the stack of papers on his desk. He was a man of business, and their transaction was complete. Seraphina stood up. "Your Grace?" He looked up, impatient. "Thank you." The Duke of Ashford stared at her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. "Do not thank me, Miss Sutton. You have just sold yourself. I have just bought you. It is a simple purchase. Good night." Friday arrived with the finality of a guillotine. The wedding was a cold, silent affair, held not in a grand cathedral, but in the Duke's private, deconsecrated chapel at Ashford House. The only attendees were the Archbishop, whom Ashford had summoned as one might summon a tailor, and the Duke's stony-faced solicitor, a Mr. Finch. Seraphina wore a simple gown of cream-coloured velvet, ordered and delivered by a seamstress who had worked for 3 straight days, her eyes wide with fear and awe. When the Archbishop pronounced them man and wife, the Duke did not kiss her. He simply took her gloved hand, raised it to his lips in a gesture that was technically correct, but utterly devoid of warmth, and said, "Your Grace." And just like that, Seraphina Sutton was gone. The Duchess of Ashford had taken her place. The days that followed were a study in opulent isolation. Ashford House was run with the silent precision of a military campaign. The staff, from Mrs. Davies the housekeeper to the lowest scullery maid, were ghosts. They were polite, efficient, and terrified of their master. They treated Seraphina with a profound, almost fearful deference, but she could feel their eyes on her, their whispered questions. Who was this woman? Why had the Duke married her? The Duke himself was, as promised, absent. He had informed her on their wedding day that he would be dining out, He did not return until well after she had retired to her own suite. Her suite was, in fact, an entire wing of the house. It was beautiful, decorated in pale blues and silver, with a sitting room, a dressing room, and a bedroom large enough to host a small ball. It was also, she quickly noted, on the opposite side of the mansion from the Duke's private apartments. A vast, silent gulf of marble and portraits separated them. On the 4th day of her marriage, Serafina decided she would not be a prisoner. She was a duchess. This was her house. She would explore it. She instructed the staff that she did not need to be followed, a request that sent Mrs. Davies into a mild panic. But Serafina was firm. She began her exploration, her footsteps echoing in the long, portrait-lined galleries. The ancestors of the Duke of Ashford stared down at her, their expressions as cold and uncompromising as his. The house was a masterpiece of cold grandeur. But as she explored, she began to notice inconsistencies. The west wing, which held the Duke's apartments, was stark and modern. But the east wing, where her rooms were, felt older, softer. And at the far end of it, past a series of disused sitting rooms, she found a narrow staircase. It led up to a landing with a single door. Unlike the others, this one was locked. She placed her hand on the knob. It was cold. "Your Grace?" Serafina spun around. Hargrove, the butler, was standing 10 feet behind her, his posture rigid. He had made no sound. "Hargrove, you startled me. I was just exploring my new home. Of course, Your Grace, this part of the house is unused. The air is not pleasant. May I show you the conservatory? The new orchids have just arrived from Brazil." He was blocking her, gently but firmly. "What is behind this door, Hargrove?" "Storage, Your Grace. Nothing of interest. Cobwebs and old furniture." His eyes, however, darted to the door for a fraction of a second too long. He was lying. "I see," Serafina said, not pushing. "Not yet. The conservatory sounds lovely. Please lead the way." That night, the Duke was home for dinner. They ate in a dining room so vast that her voice echoed. The meal was 10 courses of exquisite food, served in agonizing silence. "You have been exploring," he stated, halfway through the fish course. Serafina met his gaze. "I have. This is my home now. I wish to know it. There are parts of this house that are private. They are not your concern." "The locked door in the east wing?" she asked. His fork stopped. He placed it down with deliberate care. "Yes. You said I would be free. Does that freedom not include walking in my own home?" "You are free," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet tone. "But you are not foolish. Curiosity is a vice. Do not cultivate it, Your Grace. It will not be tolerated." The threat was clear. She changed the subject. But she did not forget. A week later, a package arrived. It was a small, leather-bound box. Inside was a simple, iron key. A note, in Hargrove's perfect script, lay beneath it. "He said you would not be deterred. He said it is better you see it than imagine it. He will be at his club until midnight." Her heart hammered. He was giving her permission? That evening, she waited until the house settled into its deep night quiet. She made her way back to the disused wing, the single key heavy in her hand. The lock was stiff, but it turned. The door opened onto a room that was not for storage. It was a bedroom, but it was strange. It was a woman's room, but it was frozen in time. Dust motes dancing in the single beam of moonlight. A layer of dust covered everything, yet it was not abandoned. It was preserved. It was a shrine. On the vanity, a silver-backed brush still held strands of dark hair. A book of poetry lay open on a chaise lounge. and over the fireplace there was a portrait. It was not one of the stern ancestors. It was a young woman, beautiful, with dark, laughing eyes and a rebellious smile. She looked nothing like the Duke. "His mother?" Serafina whispered. She moved to the desk. It was covered in papers, not letters but journals. One was open. Serafina knew she shouldn't, but her hand moved as if of its own will. She read the elegant script. It was a diary. The entries were filled with passion, with rage, with a deep, suffocating sadness. The writer, Elspeth, the previous Duchess, wrote of her husband, the old Duke, Alexander's father. She called him a monster, a tyrant, a brute. He struck Alexander again today, for spilling wine. The boy is 10. He did not cry. He just stared at his father. That stare, it frightens me. My son is building walls of ice, and I do not know how to break through. Serafina's hand flew to her mouth. She read on, entry after entry, detailing the old Duke's cruelty, his paranoia, his physical and emotional abuse of his wife and son. Then she found a packet of letters to Elspeth, tied with a black ribbon. They were not from her husband. They were from another man, a man who signed his name simply, A. My dearest Elspeth, he cannot keep you. Leave him. Come with me. We will go to Italy. I will protect you. I will protect the boy. This is not a life. It is a cage. It was her father. A was for Arthur. Arthur Sutton. Serafina sank into the dusty chair, the letters falling into her lap. Her father and the Duke's mother. They were in love. She fumbled for the last letter. It was from her father again, but the tone was different. Desperate. He knows. Elspeth, he knows. He found my letters. He threatened to ruin me, to expose us both, but worse, he threatened Alexander. He said he would disinherit the boy, have him declared mad and locked away. He is capable of it. We cannot risk the boy's life. We must end this. For your son's sake, do not write to me again. Serafina was weeping. Her father had given up the love of his life to protect her, and to protect Alexander. Her father, the sentimental fool, had sacrificed his happiness for the boy who would become the cold, ruthless Duke. And the Duke, he had given her the key. He knew. He knew her father was not a stranger, but the man his mother had loved. She heard a floorboard creak. Alexander Blackwood stood in the doorway. He was not in his evening wear. He was in a simple white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar. He looked tired and terribly human. "I did not go to my club," he said, his voice rough. "I could not." "You knew," she whispered, holding up the letter. "You knew who my father was." "Yes," Alexander said, moving into the room. He didn't look at her, but at the portrait of his mother. "I knew. She was a prisoner," he said, his voice flat. "Just as he was. My father was a monster. He destroyed everything he touched. He destroyed her." "What happened to her?" Serafina asked, dreading the answer. "After your father broke it off, she faded. She died a year later. They called it consumption. It was a lack of will to live." He finally looked at Serafina, his eyes a raw wound of ancient pain. "I found these letters after he died. I found her diaries. I learned that the only man who ever showed her kindness was Arthur Sutton." And Lord Carmichael?" A dark, dangerous rage entered the Duke's eyes. "Carmichael was my father's creature, his toad. He did my father's dirty work. When my father died, Carmichael knew all his secrets, all his investments. He knew your father was vulnerable, and he knew he was my mother's friend. The bad investment was not just business. It was revenge. It was Carmichael, finishing the job my father started. He destroyed your father in my father's name." Serafina was shaking. "So when you made that offer, in the ballroom—" "I was not just buying a duchess," Alexander said, his voice raw. "I was repaying a debt. I was ending a blood feud. I was destroying the last piece of my father's legacy. I was protecting the daughter of the only man who ever tried to protect my mother." He had not made a bargain. He had delivered justice. "Why? Why didn't you tell me?" "Tell you what?" he sneered, the cold mask snapping back into place. "That you were a pawn in a game started before you were born? That my offer was based on pity and an old debt? I offered you a contract. It is cleaner that way." "Cleaner?" she cried, standing up. "Alexander, this changes everything." "It changes nothing," he thundered, his control breaking. "You are my duchess. I am your duke. The terms stand. This room. This is the past. It is buried. You will not speak of it again." He strode also from the room, slamming the door behind him. But Serafina did not hear the slam. She had heard only one thing. He had called her a pawn. But she had seen his eyes. She had seen the torment. He wasn't protecting himself from the past. He was protecting himself from her. The cold, feared Duke of Ashford was, beneath the ice, terrified. And in that moment, her fear of him vanished, replaced by a sudden, aching and incredibly dangerous wave of compassion. The revelation in his mother's room changed Serafina. She was no longer a prisoner. She began to truly act as the Duchess, managing the households with a sharp mind that impressed the staff. The fear they held for the Duke slowly transformed into deep respect for her. Ashford House, once cold, began to feel warmer with her presence. Alexander watched this from a distance. He saw the flowers she arranged, heard her playing the pianoforte, and tasted the simpler, warmer meals she ordered. He said nothing, but he began to come home for dinner more often. The Tun was desperate to see the new couple. When an invitation arrived for the Austrian embassy masquerade, Serafina saw her chance. "Lord Carmichael will be there," she told Alexander in his library. "He has unfinished business, an oversight." She argued that letting the man who destroyed her father and tormented his mother walk free was not justice. Seeing the steel in her spine, Alexander agreed. "And what do you propose, Your Grace?" he asked, a dangerous smile on his lips. "I propose we attend," she replied. They made a stunning entrance. Serafina was in a commanding crimson gown, wearing the Ashford diamonds. Alexander, in his black domino mask, looked like a formidable executioner. They found Carmichael, arrogant in an Apollo mask. The confrontation was swift and brutal. "I have been reviewing my late father's papers," Alexander announced, his voice cutting through the chatter. He publicly revealed the letters detailing the scheme between Carmichael and the old Duke to devalue the Ohio and Mississippi stock. "That line is worthless," a man exclaimed. "So everyone was led to believe," Alexander countered, explaining the plot to buy the shares for pennies. "But my father died," he continued, leaving Carmichael with a failed plan. Serafina stepped forward, and a convenient scapegoat. "My father." Alexander delivered the final blow, revealing he had a sworn testimony from the broker, who was now with Bow Street. Desperate, Carmichael lunged at Serafina. Alexander moved faster, catching his wrist in an agonizing grip. "You will never," he snarled, "lay a hand on my wife." Guards hauled the ruined Carmichael away. Alexander turned to Serafina, offering his arm. "Shall we go home?" "Yes, Alexander," she said, using his name for the very first time. The carriage ride home was as silent as their first, but now it was charged with unspoken victory. When they arrived at Ashford House, Serafina turned toward her wing, but Alexander stopped her. Seraphina, he said, using her name for the first time. My library. There he confessed the truth. He had seen her months before, laughing with her father, and had been captivated. He had watched from afar after her ruin, his feared reputation a shield built against his father's cruelty. When he saw Carmichael threaten her, he acted. The public bargain wasn't a contract. It was a fortress. It was the only way a man who knew only power, not affection, could protect her. He offered a contract because he was terrified she would reject the man behind the mask. Tears streamed down her face. You are not your father, Alexander, she whispered. You are the man who saved me. She stepped forward and kissed him. It was an explosive kiss, shattering 20 years of his loneliness. He pulled back, his voice hoarse. This was not part of the contract. Then to hell with the contract, she replied. A slow, genuine smile transformed his face. To hell with the contract, he agreed, lifting her into his arms and carrying her toward his own wing. And so, the most feared Duke in London became the most devoted husband. The devil's bargain, made in a silent ballroom, became the greatest love story the Tun had ever witnessed. Seraphina didn't just save the Duke from his past, he saved her from her future, and together they built a new one. The whispers that followed Alexander Blackwood were no longer of fear, but of awe and of envy. Because everyone knew that while the Duke of Ashford might be feared by the world, he was utterly, breathlessly, and completely devoted to his Duchess. Thank you for listening to this story. If you were on the edge of your seat, please don't forget to hit that like button, as it truly helps this channel grow. What was your favorite twist? Let me know in the comments below. And if you love stories where the underdog triumphs and love conquers all, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell. We have new dramatic stories coming out every single week, and you won't want to miss a single one. Share this video with a friend who needs a great story, and we'll see you in the next one.